Yesterday, I had a ceremony similar to this, where we handed over a special piece of equipment to the forestry department. This piece of equipment will allow us, when we are building out our infrastructure, not to cut down the trees, but we are able to relocate them. So we can take them up by the root and take them to somewhere else. And this increases the survivability of the tree when it is transplanted elsewhere up to 90%. Now, that piece of equipment costs 76 million Jamaican dollars. That $76 million, I'm sure others are looking on and say, that could have repaired a school. That could have repaired a road. That could have built a few houses. That could have done a water supply project. Yes. I start at that point because, in about 1991, 1992, in the early 90s, there was a very popular Minister of Works, and he was supervising the expansion of Hope Road in Kingston, in the Ligani area, which would have included the construction of bus bays and right at the Ligani post office. And there was a massive guango tree there. I'm looking at the audience and seeing the people who are 30 years old or older. They might recall this. The younger ones may not. And the government took the decision to cut down the guango tree. Guango tree would have been there for decades. And, people took it personally. This conflict between the built environment and the natural environment. People want to be able to take public transportation with certain ease and comfort, but we also want to have the shade and beauty of our trees. So we have run into this several times before. The latest one would have been when we were doing the improvement works along Constant Spring Road, and there were a certain number of trees that we had to remove. Those trees were the nesting place for a flock of parakeets that lived in them. And again, it created a challenge for the government. Government is not only about the concrete and steel. All right? Government is about the holistic development of the person. And the holistic development of the person involves also taking into account the natural habitat in which man lives. So the government is a steward of your affairs, not just your economic affairs, not just your social affairs, but we are stewards of your environmental affairs. And we have to balance all of these together. So, just for note, the government is spending over $45 billion in the Spark program on roads. We spend close to another $5 billion on the REACH program and other programs. But we only spent $76 million on this piece of equipment. So put it into context. I'm giving you that information as citizens, as taxpayers, who will have to judge the government's allocative decisions as to whether or not it made sense. There are some persons who would disagree with it, but I think most Jamaicans would appreciate that it is important that we pay attention to the preservation and protection of the environment. Now, I segue very quickly into the Myton Gully. This gully is a naturally existing feature of the geography of this area. we came here and saw this gully. We came here and we decided that we're going to build in proximity to this gully. We came here and we put in a road that traverses the natural waterway of the gully. It's not nature that troubled us, it's we go and trouble nature. But man, as the steward of the environment, has the ability, has the knowledge to build out the environment in a way to preserve the natural environment and increase our comfort, our convenience, and our efficiency. What existed here before, which was built many decades, possibly in the 70s or 80s, was not sufficient. My understanding is that it had one box culvert that would not have been able to carry the volume of water securely across the road and into the retention area. And the reason for that is that as we have built roads, these become flat, non-porous surfaces that carry water. As we build more houses with roofs on them that create runoffs that run onto these roads, and as we pave more areas which prevent the percolation of water naturally into the soil, what happens? The water has to be channeled. And so what was built several decades ago to account for the water runoff then was not sufficient to account for the water runoff now because of the building that we have been doing in the area. We are building for our convenience. Yes, we are building our houses, we are building our roads. But as we are doing that, we are also creating greater inconvenience because there is more water. But there was also another issue. There is also more waste. And so the blockage of that single culvert was not primarily an issue of the volume of water going in, but also plastics, other household debris that would end up creating a congestion at that inlet and outlet point. So man, in trying to get his own convenience, is also not just destroying nature, but also inconveniencing himself. So it requires us then to think in a broader way about development. So it's not just about building my house and me feeling comfortable in my house, or building a road for me to feel comfortable to drive on, or taking the decision that, I can't find land anywhere else, and therefore I'm going to build on the gully bank. We all have to start to think about how we protect the environment, not just for our personal convenience, but how do we protect the environment for the benefit of the community, but more than that, for the benefit of generations yet to come. It is a duty that each and every one of us here has, that we have to start to think in this way. Yes, I understand, as your Member of Parliament, Everard Warmington, has pointed out, that there are persons living on the gully bank. And yes, I can understand why that is the case. We all have to live. We all need somewhere to live. But increasingly we are seeing that our private decisions about where we choose to live and how we choose to live is having serious public, national, and global consequences, which comes back to threaten our own shelter. Because that gully bank on which you have chosen to live, it is not safe. And the waste from where you live that gets into the gully, that blocks the culvert, creates the flooding issue that in turn threatens where you live. So government has to take the lead in this. Government has to be far more enlightened in its development policy. It has to be far more comprehensive. But government has to be far more understanding of the dynamics, the social and economic dynamics that you face. So what has this government been doing? The first order of business is to create the economy that generates the revenues to do projects like this. When you have no economy and you're not generating any revenues, you will not get projects like this. As I was driving in and listening to the radio, a radio commentator was acknowledging that the government has purchased this piece of equipment that will allow it to move the trees. And he was saying, it's not a big thing for most people, but it is an important thing. And then he went on to say, the only question I have is, why did it take the government so long? Why did it take the government so long to deal with Myton Gully? Mr. Sweeney pointed out that for 10 years this has been a concern brought to the Jamaica Social Investment Fund. Why? And it's a simple answer. The less money you have in your budget, the longer it takes for projects to get done. It's a simple answer. So again this morning on my way in, I listened to a caller in Hopewell, Hanover, and the caller was very angry that his road is in a terrible state of disrepair, like many roads across Jamaica. And every time you drop into a pothole, you don't want to hear nothing about why and any reason. You just want that road fixed. And I understand that. That is what the government is there to do, to just get the road fixed. But there is a certain reality that as electors, you have to account, appreciate, absorb, and internalize in your own analysis of the performance of the government. Jamaica has over 27,000 kilometers of roads. Half of them are in a state of disrepair. Those roads were not built in 10 years. They were not built in 20 years. They were not built in 30 years, 40 years. Those roads were built, some of them, as far back as 100 years ago. So you cannot expect that every single bad road is going to be fixed in 1 decade. What the public does not know, however, is how many roads has been actually fixed in the decade. What you hear is of the roads not fixed, but you don't hear of the roads fixed. What you hear is of the communities that don't have water. What you don't hear is of the communities that have gotten water. What you hear of is the places that are flooded out because of poor drainage, but what you don't hear of is that we have fixed this problem that has existed for decades in the Myton Gully, spending over 370 million Jamaican dollars to expand the waterway with 4 culverts and to pave the invert for over 200 meters. Yes. 38,000 people who live in this area who would normally be affected, plus all the traffic that moves through, no longer has this inconvenience. But nobody is going to credit the government with that performance. It is the reality of our politics and the way in which we conduct our social and political affairs. So my job is to constantly bring into the public domain the work of the government. Because, you know, for years we have been programmed to be suspicious of government, to be disbelieving of government. We have been programmed for governments that don't perform. That's how it has been. And so what they call the confirmation bias that exists within people is to believe that government is not performing, even when confronted with the facts. And the fact is that no other administration in the history of Jamaica has spent more on roads and building of highways than this administration has in the last 9 years. None. But having said that, I am not gloating. I am not bragging. I am stating a fact. And as I have stated that fact, I will also say there is still much, 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 much more to be done. The problem of the road in Hopewell not being repaired or anywhere else in Jamaica genuinely could not only be ascribed to the current government. The problem of the community in Stirling Castle or wherever it was that I went the other day, where I was confronted by a lady who said her community didn't have water, could not only be ascribed to this government. In other words, as I pointed out in Parliament some time ago, if you build a road, the road cannot last forever. And I think it is in the consciousness of Jamaicans that when you build a road, it will last forever. A road has a lifespan of between 7 and 15 years, depending on the kind of road you build. You can extend that by another 5 or even 10 years, depending on the level of maintenance that you do on the road. Now, if after 7 years you don't do any maintenance on the road, and then the potholes start to emerge, and then the road itself deteriorates and fall apart, and then when you reach year 20 now, and it's a different government in place, you start to just blame this government. This government is responsible, but it is not its fault. So, as the government now, I take responsibility for the roads. And how do I do that? First thing, we go and we do a proper accounting for the road. Because before, people would call about their road and you couldn't even find it on a map. It is on no register. Nobody knows about the road. It's a dispute sometimes. Sometimes you say, this road needs to be fixed. And when you go to the MP say, no, this is a parish council road. And when you go to the parish council, they say, no, this is a NWA road. And then sometimes you go to the parish council and say, this road needs to be fixed. And the parish council says, no, there's a farm road. Worse if you live in a subdivision. You go all over and they tell you, no, we don't have that road on any gazette or any register. That is an orphan road. A road that was laid in a subdivision but not handed over to any authority. So that's the first thing we have done. We are still in the process of properly documenting the road. And as an aside, we're going to have another program to ensure that all the roads are properly named. Because if you look on one map, one road is spelled another way. You go to another map, it's spelled another way. And that all the addresses are properly unified. So that is a special program that will come out of the proper documentation of our roads. Once that is done, then we do a thorough assessment of all the roads. Meaning, what is the state of disrepair of the roads? And then once you have that established, then you can put a ranking of priorities. The next step now is to secure a budgetary allocation that can, over a period of a decade, repair all the critical and priority roads. So I need to reorient the minds of the Jamaican citizens that you're not going to repair all the roads today or this year. It's going to take you at least a decade to repair roads that have not been repaired in 50, 60 years, some of them, or ever, since they were built. And what you need to look for and hold governments to account for is not what they fix today, but what is the program that they have put in place so that every week or every year or every month there is a consistent repairing of roads. And to date, the only government that has been able to do that out of its own resources is this administration with the Spark program. $40 billion has been allocated, and that will do just over 600 roads across Jamaica. We have had to put $5 billion on it because you can't lay roads without putting in pipes, because some areas you have to connect the water. It takes a little time to go through all the processes so that there is no issue with any accusation of corruption. We want to ensure that every dollar that is allocated to the road is on the road and not in somebody's pocket. And so there are some steps and processes that we go through. So I heard, that caller saying, well, every week them tell me say the road will come this week and it'll come that week and it not come. Sometimes that's how it is. Sometimes the things are at procurement and all kinds of things happen and we have to follow the procurement rules. Sometimes somebody object and say, no, they didn't do the process right and we have to start it over again. The law is blind to you waiting for that road. The public servant who has to do all the documentation, them say, them not go prison. Them a make sure all the I's are dotted and T's crossed. And the public needs to appreciate this, that there is a process that we go through, because it is you, Sabo, and the very public who will turn around and cost the governments and the politicians that they are not managing your funds appropriately. It's a dynamic that I have to manage. Having been without the road for so long, you're frustrated. But I have to make sure that when the road is fixed, it is properly fixed. We have to develop speed. So the public servant has to figure out how to move faster, perfect the compliance requirements, and take into consideration that man who called from Western Hanover about his road, that we consider you, sir, in as much as we are trying to comply. So I thought I would just use this handing over as a platform to have this conversation with my Jamaican brothers and sisters about where we are. Today is a different day in Jamaica. Today is not a promise about pothole-free by 2003. An empty promise that was not backed by a budget. Today is not about the government expanding its built environment at the expense of the natural environment, because we have taken the steps, a small step albeit, to be able to preserve our trees in the environment. So this is a different Jamaica, fundamentally, from the Jamaica that existed before. And yes, you sometimes may not see the change. But if I were to tell you that Jamaica has planted in the last 5 years 3 million trees, you would say, what? I don't see it. But you drive past the tree every day and would know that we planted it. When you go on the east-west highway and you look on the right side when you're coming in, all of those trees that you see there, we planted them. And we have now given a directive to plant another 3 million trees over the next 5 years. Public would know this, or would be even concerned. And when we're doing our road projects, we took a decision in 2024 that all our road corridors will have a tree canopy in proximity to them to help with the cooling of our city. These are all decisions that we have taken. So you are living in a different Jamaica created by a different government. A government that understands, a government that has a comprehensive plan for development, a government that cares, but more than anything else, a government that has the wherewithal to create the funds to deliver the benefits that you need. I close by saying that in everything we do, we must have faith. For a long time, we have been disappointed. The development and the benefits have seemed that, they take so long to come. But 10 years ago, nobody would ever believe that we could stand and say the murder rate in Jamaica is 44% less than what it was a year before. But mind you, this is the first time since the 1980s that you're having 3 consecutive years of decline in the murder rate. So it's not a one-year thing. We had a decline in 2023. We had a decline that was like 8 or 7%. And we had a decline in 2024 that was like 19%. And now we are at 44%. It's a totally different Jamaica. There are those who don't want to believe it, It irks them, it rankles them that this is happening because they are so used to the negative news. So there is a lag time for people to understand it and to appreciate it. But the facts are the facts. And when I speak to you, I give you the facts. You do with it what you want to do, but I give you the facts. You wrestle with your emotions, but you can't overcome the facts. So you have to have faith. And, they say that faith is the substance of things hoped for. Right? Complete it for me. And the evidence of things unseen. So I know every Jamaican is hoping for their roads. Every Jamaican is hoping for their drains and gully to be repaired. Every Jamaican is hoping to own their house. Every Jamaican is hoping for a peaceful country. But we are giving you the evidence of it. This is evidence of the things you hope for. This investment in Myton Gully of $326 million. It's evidence of it. The reduction in crime, evidence of it. The reduction in unemployment, evidence of it. The reduction of the national debt, evidence of it. 10 budgets and no new taxes, evidence of it. It's the reality. So, I leave you with this thought. Choose Jamaica.